Hello and welcome back. I'm Len Matheson. This is the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Chico State University course on maintaining optimum brain health and fitness. This is our second session. Today we're going to address the second and third of the 5 useful tools: just right challenges and cognitive reserve capacity.
Studying the brain, I will never be bored. The brain is this great mystery, and it's beautiful. And I want to educate the public about the beauty of this incredible organ. I'm a neuroanatomist by training and the author of My Stroke of Insight. Grew up to be a brain scientist at Harvard. I love biology. I love anatomy. The human body is a beautiful thing. This is the human right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And it's so easy for the brain to go offline. I woke up on the morning of December 10, 1996, and had a major hemorrhage in my left hemisphere. No one would ever expect me to be having a stroke. And of course, I'm looking at my own brain through the eyes of a neuroanatomist.
2.5 weeks after the hemorrhage, the surgeons went in and they removed a blood clot the size of a golf ball. Here I am with my mama, who's a true angel in my life. It took me 8 years to completely recover.
And it was clear that the person I had been before died that morning. She died. And who I was now going to be was somebody new. The stroke helped me understand the brain in a way that reading a million textbooks couldn't give me. Our health in general is determined by our brain health. So paying attention to it, thinking about it, nurturing it makes all the difference in the world. Now, I really listen to what my body and brain need. Pay attention to what I eat. Sleep is everything. Movement is everything. And really important that we develop the whole brain. Whole brain living is healthy brain living. There are different tools then that we can use in order to stimulate the right brain as well as the left brain so that we really have very meaningful, fulfilling, engaged lives. Most days, I like having nothing on the calendar. And that leaves me time to be in my right brain. Just who am I in the moment and what part of me wants to explore? Just experiential, freedom, energy, colorful. When I'm doing my art, it's delicious. As we get older, we routinize ourselves so that we have this lovely little routine that's fit in a box. Well, what you're saying to your brain is, it's okay. You only have to be the size of the box. But that's not what we want. We want new, unfamiliar. And that's what you want to do. You want to keep your brain cells excited. And to me, that's what a healthy life is all about. It's about how do I create my own richness of possibility, the beauty of being alive.
So what we're addressing this week is how to protect and nurture a healthy hippocampus. If you'll recall from the brief introduction to the hippocampus last week, the hippocampus is a part of your brain that's the staging area for new neural networks. New neural networks and the elaboration of existing neural networks begin with information that is temporarily stored in the hippocampus. When I say temporary, it's only a few hours, probably a maximum of 8 hours. During that time, a process called neuroconsolidation takes place. About 1% of the information, the most important 1%, is consolidated into long-term memories based on information that's stored in the hippocampus. Now, neuroconsolidation is going on right now. It's going on all day, but most of the good neuroconsolidation actually takes place while you sleep. So that's why it's so important to provide information to your hippocampus That's the information you want to put into long-term memories just before you drop off to sleep. And for us, a really important reason why we want to pay attention to the hippocampus is that it's the first place that Alzheimer's disease shows up. When people begin to experience mild cognitive impairment, and we take a close look at their brains, it's the hippocampus where that's occurring.
London's legendary taxi drivers are the Olympic athletes of memory. Navigating the intimidating labyrinth that is central London, they must create an intricate mental map consisting of thousands of streets, landmarks, and locations. University of London scientists studying the shape of memory found ideal subjects right in their own backyard. For 150 years, every new cab driver has had to pass a grueling exam, known to Londoners simply as the knowledge. It takes most hopefuls at least 2 years to master, giving researchers a superb opportunity to look at how the brain adapts when required to retain vast amounts of information.
Thanks, mate. Can you take me to Albert Hall? Albert Hall, yeah. Cheers.
When somebody gets in your cab, they'll say, take me to so-and-so, and it's got to be like that. You've got to know instantly where you're going, which way to be pointing. So there's a lot of retention. You've got to retain a lot of what you've learned as well.
Scientists suspected a particular region of the brain called the hippocampus might be the key to the taxi driver's success.
Now, run me to the nearest police station.
Lee Bar, Waterloo Bridge, Ford Lancaster Place.
If memory depends upon the hippocampus, at the Knowledge Point School, drivers in training surely give this part of their brain a good workout.
Dave, give me the name of a restaurant on Portland Road with a lady's name.
Chutney Mary's.
Hereford Road, where would you give me?
Veronica's.
After class, students like Andy Miller take to the streets. Since visual processing occupies more brain activity than all the other senses combined, it is not surprising that direct experience is an essential part of the knowledge training.
You start off learning all the roads, then you have to learn all the places on every road. With all the routes that you have to do for the knowledge, you couldn't possibly do it on a map. You have to get out on your bike in the rain, the cold, the snow. You learn it bit by bit.
But how does the brain retain and order all that information? As the scientists suspected, mastering the knowledge may have a physical impact on the brain itself. Their study concluded that part of the hippocampus was indeed larger than average in these drivers. In fact, the most dramatic differences were seen in the drivers who were on the job the longest.
The hippocampus has a spatial map in it, and what seems to be happening in the taxi drivers is that the spatial map is laid down of central London, and laying this down causes the connections to develop and grow and more of them to form, and that makes part of the hippocampus get bigger.
It's almost like you've somehow, somewhere up in your brain, you've created enough space to sort of slip this map in, a little bit of software.
This study suggests that the adult brain can refashion its basic anatomy according to the requirements of its owner. Doctors hope these insights can be used to help restore the minds of stroke victims, Alzheimer's patients, and those suffering brain traumas.
So what I want you to do is to begin to take on just right challenges in your life. Now really, you've been doing this since you were a child. All of the neural networks that have been developed, that are good, that are strong, that are useful to you, were developed in response to just right challenges, in which a meaningful task has difficulty that's just beyond your current ability. Going just beyond your current ability challenges your body and your brain to develop additional capacity.
So yes, my muscles are a bit bigger than they were before I started weightlifting, but I'm still wearing a size 10. I've never seen myself, and no one else has ever seen me, as a particularly sporty person or an athlete.
Nice, Captain. And again.
And so there is kind of a little bit of pleasure in thinking that, yes, I am a champion powerlifter. That's kind of nice to discover something new about yourself after the age of 65. I imagine, though I will fight it to the very last, that there will come a point when my weights stop increasing and where my goal will be to maintain rather than increase my weights. But that's not yet. Why stop? There's no reason to stop. Why should I stop?
Wow, doesn't she have wonderful physical reserve capacity? She's been taking on just right challenges in weightlifting to develop her ability that exceeds what's normally required. Her occupation is a linguistics professor at Oxford University. She definitely doesn't need that excess physical capacity. And my guess is that she's actually in her job taking on just right challenges that develop her cognitive reserve capacity as well. Cognitive reserve capacity is like physical reserve capacity. It's ability that exceeds what is normally required. So you can see that a just right challenge and the development of cognitive reserve capacity are linked. And let me point out the importance of cognitive reserve capacity for people who are aging. Up to this point in our lives, we really haven't needed to call on all of our cognitive reserve capacity except when we're very highly challenged. In an emergency situation or under high levels of stress, we may have had to call on our cognitive reserve capacity, but for 99.9% of our lives, we haven't had to tap into it. But now, as we learned last week, our brains are slowing down, we need to tap into that cognitive reserve capacity. So that's what this course is about today. Now, just like we had Alice and her apples explaining to us about neural networks last week, we're going to have a young guide to help us understand cognitive reserve capacity this week. This is Betty and her BEAKERS. Betty is a 5-year-old girl in a class here with other 5-year-old girls, and isn't it wonderful that they're being exposed to chemistry? They're being encouraged to go ahead and do chemical experiments. And so Betty's cognitive reserve capacity began to develop early, really before she was 5 years old, but it really began to be turbocharged in a class like this. Cognitive reserve capacity is stimulated by just right challenges. Cognitive reserve capacity is driven by curiosity. Cognitive reserve capacity is nurtured by exercise and nutrition. And cognitive reserve capacity is protected by brain restorative sleep. And here we have Betty on the first day of her residency program to become a trauma surgeon, 28 years old, at the Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, where I used to teach. Betty is well on her way to becoming a trauma surgeon because she has developed cognitive capacity that fits that job. Now, how did she do this? Well, let's take a look at the two different types of cognitive capacity that we normally consider. The first type of cognitive capacity is called fluid. Fluid intelligence or fluid cognitive capacity is novel reasoning, driven by curiosity, limited primarily by processing speed. Processing speed creates problems with things like working memory, which limit the ability of the person to perform cognitive tasks. And here's a graph of Betty's cognitive capacity starting in the 5th grade at age 10. This graph has a median score of 50 and a standard deviation of 10. That means that scores between 40 and 60 are average scores. And you can see at age 10, Betty was at the high end of the average range. But because of her curiosity and devotion and good teachers and good parents, her fluid cognitive capacity actually increased over the next 15 years. It peaked at about age 20. And how about the second type of cognitive capacity? We've got fluid, and now we need to take a look at crystallized cognitive capacity, which is practiced reasoning through the application of existing knowledge. And here's a graph of Betty's cognitive capacity looking at crystallized cognitive capacity over her age span. We've got the same range here, with the average person being at a 50 or ranging between 40 and 60. And what you can see here, Betty's crystallized cognitive capacity continued to increase until she was 65 years old. Let's overlay both of these cognitive capacities, and what you can see is that Betty's crystallized cognitive capacity more than offset her fluid cognitive capacity that began to drop off after about age 30. What drove that increase in her crystallized cognitive capacity? Well, for Betty, it was the idea at about age 12 that she wanted to be a chief trauma surgeon. I'm not sure where she got the idea, maybe from a friend, maybe from a teacher, maybe from a parent. But in any case, she had this as a goal at about age 12. And over the course of her academic career, that stimulated quite a bit of learning, so that by the time she entered her residency program at age 28, she was well on her way to becoming a trauma surgeon. Now, after completing her residency program, she was a trauma surgeon, but she wasn't a chief trauma surgeon. She was able to work in hospital emergency rooms and take care of trauma victims that came in, but she really wanted to be the chief. So in order to continue to increase her crystallized cognitive capacity, Betty signed up with the United States Army and went overseas. She went to Afghanistan as a trauma surgeon in a very busy combat hospital. And she came back from Afghanistan ready to be a chief trauma surgeon. And she continued working as a chief trauma surgeon until she retired and took a better job at age 65. At age 65, Betty took on being Grandma Betty. She was no longer a chief trauma surgeon, but she was doing something that she actually enjoyed even more. The chief trauma surgeon job had become so taxing on her that she was ready to transfer into a new occupation as Grandma Betty. But look what happened to her crystallized cognitive capacity. As she retired, her ability to continue growing her crystallized cognitive capacity dropped off precipitously, and this is what we see with retirement. But wait a minute, there was another ending for Betty. In addition to becoming Grandma Betty, she also got involved in Osher Lifelong Learning Institute and took courses that continued to develop her crystallized cognitive capacity. Driven by her curiosity, she took several courses a week, learning things that she didn't know. She hadn't had the opportunity to learn in her career up to that point. And so what I'd like to do today is to talk with you about how to develop a just right challenge on a regular basis in various tasks that are meaningful to you with difficulty that is just beyond your current ability. Now, there are 3 requirements for just right challenges. 1, it has to be personally meaningful. It's got to be something that you value, something that you feel like is really important to you. 2, it's got to require effort to manage new information. Just like we heard from Dr. Taylor in her video, I want you to grow your brain beyond the box that you've put it in. There's no reason to not grow it. That's one of the great values of the OLLI program. Driven by curiosity, you can take on just right challenges to continue to develop your cognitive capacity beyond the box that you might otherwise be inclined to leave it in. But this requires effort because you're going to be managing new information. The third requirement for developing your cognitive capacity using just right challenges is that it must engage multiple brain areas. Actually, any cognitive task that's a just right challenge will improve your cognitive capacity, but you get the optimal improvement in cognitive capacity by engaging multiple brain areas. And the more brain areas, the better. So let's take a look at one activity that you could take on that might be a just right challenge for you to be able to increase your cognitive capacity. How about quilting? Now, quilting in and of itself is a good task to improve your cognitive capacity, especially if you don't know much about quilting. It's something you have to learn. And put quilting into a social setting where you're interacting with other people and all of the things that you need to be able to do, all of the things that you're asking your brain to do to communicate, to manage emotions, to manage relationships. at the same time that you're working with your hands and your eyes and your brain to be creative. That's just a wonderful combination of just right challenges to optimally develop your cognitive capacity.
What it allowed me to do is relieve the stress of a very isolated job.
When Dave White has some downtime on the road, the long-haul trucker likes to be productive. So he climbs into the cabin of his semi-tractor trailer and he sews quilts.
Modern truck driving is comfortable, but it still is very isolated from family and friends. There it is. This gives me a time to be able to think about those family and friends as well as to be able to accomplish something.
It's not the sort of hobby you might expect from a former military guy who drives about 2,600 miles a week. But White says it suits him just fine.
I'm ready to start quilting.
He started out working on simple patterns, but he's graduated to more complicated designs.
What's nice about this is you'll notice that there's, if I was to pull on the seams, there's no extra fabric. That's what I'm looking for.
Wasn't that wonderful? So how do you grow your hippocampus? How do you grow your hippocampus? Well, you're going to take on just right challenges to develop cognitive reserve capacity. You're going to get brain restorative sleep that we'll talk about next week. And the week after, we're going to talk about exercise and nutrition. What's going to happen is that you're going to rapidly increase the synaptic connections in the neurons that are involved in your hippocampus and those that spread throughout the cerebrum that have to do with the cognitive capacities that are being challenged. So, what is your just right challenge for this week? It's got to be personally meaningful. It's got to require effort. It's got to engage multiple brain areas. I gave you some examples and we heard from some others. One person in the class talked about asking his wife to help him get into quilting. Fantastic. This gentleman is a retired truck driver. He's already signed up for an OLLI class to learn how to paint. And now when his wife gets back into town from vacation, he's going to ask her to get him started with quilting. I shared with you a just right challenge that I take on a regular basis, and that is meeting people, shaking their hand, offering my name, asking for their name, and getting enough detail about them so that I can begin to develop a neural network that's related to that person. And the reason that that engages multiple brain areas is that what's called the face fusiform area involves the right hippocampus and other structures in the right parietal lobe, things over at the right side of the brain in the right hemisphere. It engages the face and other information about where the person is from, the context in which I've met the person and so forth, with the person's name and other declarative memory characteristics that are housed in the left brain. So for me to be able to use that person's name, I'm forcing my brain to make neural networks that connect through what's known as the corpus callosum, about 250 million neurons that span between the two hemispheres. I'm improving the connectivity between the two hemispheres. And if you think about what Dr. Taylor did with her artwork, she used her right hemisphere to bring her left hemisphere back online. She used her right hemisphere to prop up her left hemisphere and stimulate it appropriately with dozens of just right challenges every day, so that she eventually brought herself back to full function with both hemispheres. It took her 8 years to do it, but she was successful. I want to wrap up by offering you a challenge. And this is the challenge. It has to do with an attitude. This is an attitude that I run into with a lot of my clients. Of course, they come in discouraged and depressed. Otherwise, they wouldn't be my clients. And what happens is that I need to first help them to get away from the, I can't do it. I've never been able to do that sort of thing. I've never been good with names and faces, for example, or I can't learn to use an iPhone. Or for an older person, I don't know how to use computers. I've never been able to do that. What I encourage you to do, and I really want you to take this seriously, is change that language from I can't to I can. From I've never been able to, well, I can't yet do that. Or up till now, I haven't been able to do it. I want you to turn that attitude around from impossible to it's possible. And now to wrap up, these are our Optimum aging references for this week. First of all, Dr. Taylor's book, My Stroke of Insight, you can get it on Amazon. If you can afford to do it, I do recommend the Audible version, because in the Audible version, she actually expands upon some of what's in the book, especially in the area of her relationship with her mother, which is absolutely crucial. What her mother did with her in the first few days after she had her stroke was wonderful and really important. We now understand how therapeutic that was for Dr. Bolte Taylor. We also have her TED Talk. Please get it online. She's had more than 27 million downloads of that. It's wonderful. You really ought to give yourself that opportunity to listen to her. So let's set the stage for next week. Next week we're going to deal with how do you develop brain restorative sleep. Remember what I said about neuroconsolidation taking place mostly while you're asleep? Well, brain restorative sleep is a really important part of that. And there's been some recent research that shows that the housekeeping that the brain is able to do during really deep sleep may be crucial to avoid the early onset of dementia. And finally, let me just quickly say that today, February 3, 2020, is the 50th anniversary of meeting this young man. The first day of my practice 50 years ago, I met Danny Monday. He was a young man, just 15 years old, with spinal muscular atrophy. Danny taught me that quality of life is not entirely determined by our circumstances. That's been a wonderful lesson for me, and I want to thank Danny for getting me started going down the right road. Thank you, Danny. And would you please consider subscribing? I'm in the process of developing this video channel. It would be helpful if you gave me some guidance on that. What do you like? What do you not like? Give me some suggestions about the kinds of videos that I can post. Please subscribe and send me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Take care now.